The crystal chandeliers of the Grand Hyatt Seoul cast fractured light across 500 of Asia's most powerful investors. Kang Tae-hyun had not planned to attend, but a last-minute acquisition negotiation demanded his presence. He stood near the entrance, scanning the crowd with cold precision, until his breath stopped. Across the ballroom, surrounded by men he recognized from Forbes covers, stood his estranged wife, Amara, dressed in understated elegance, signing documents. Documents involving billions. The investors bowed to her. Bowed. His hand tightened around his wine glass, the ink of the traditional Korean pine tattoo on his inner wrist darkening against his pale skin. The woman he had pitied for 5 years was never poor. She had been hiding everything. Please like, share, and subscribe. The ballroom hummed with a quiet symphony of wealth. Champagne flutes clinked. Business cards exchanged hands like currency. But Kang Tae-hyun heard nothing. His entire world had narrowed to a single figure across the room. Amara stood beside Victor Okonkwo, the legendary Nigerian oil magnate whose handshake could move markets. She spoke softly, her lips barely moving, yet every man surrounding her leaned closer. Desperate to hear. Desperate to please. Tae-hyun had spent 5 years believing his wife survived on the thin margins of a neighborhood supermarket in Mapo district. He had sent money. She had returned every envelope unopened. He had assumed pride. He had assumed stubbornness. He had never assumed this. A server passed, and Tae-hyun set his untouched wine on the tray without looking. His jaw tightened as he watched a younger businessman, someone he vaguely recognized from a competing logistics firm, place his hand on the small of Amara's back. She stepped away. Gracefully. Naturally. As if redirecting water around stone. But the man persisted, leaning closer. Tae-hyun's feet moved before his mind granted permission. Across the ballroom. Amara felt him before she saw him. The air shifted. Conversations around her seemed to quiet by 1 degree, the way silence always preceded Kang Tae-hyun's presence. She continued signing the foundation charter without pause. $53 million allocated to agricultural development across sub-Saharan Africa. Her grandfather's legacy, carefully hidden for 3 decades, now flowing through her hands. Mrs. Kim. The voice came from behind her. Low. Controlled. Achingly familiar. She finished her signature before turning. Their eyes met. 5 years of silence collapsed into a single breath. He looked the same. Sharp jawline carved from marble. Eyes that revealed nothing and observed everything. The tailored black suit that fit him like armor. But there was something new in his gaze. Confusion. And beneath that, something she had never seen in their 3 years of marriage. Uncertainty. Chairman Kang, she said calmly. I didn't expect to see you here. The title landed like a blade between them. Not Tae-hyun. Not husband. Chairman. He stepped closer. Close enough that she could see the edge of another tattoo, a geometric pattern representing discipline, peeking above his collar. You never mentioned you had business at the Grand Hyatt, he said quietly. You never asked. The words held no bitterness. Only truth. Around them, the investors had grown still. They sensed the tension without understanding its source. Victor Okonkwo cleared his throat diplomatically. Chairman Kang, I wasn't aware you knew our foundation's principal benefactor. Tae-hyun's expression didn't change. But his eyes darkened. Benefactor. Later that evening. The gala continued, but Tae-hyun had stopped participating. He stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Seoul skyline, his reflection ghost-like against the glass. His assistant, Secretary Yoon, approached cautiously. Sir, the acquisition team is waiting in the private suite. Cancel it. Sir. I said cancel it. Secretary Yoon had worked for Tae-hyun for 11 years. He had seen the chairman negotiate billion-dollar deals without blinking. He had watched him dismantle rival companies with surgical precision. He had never heard him cancel a meeting. May I ask why, sir? Tae-hyun's gaze remained fixed on the window, but he wasn't looking at the skyline. He was watching Amara's reflection as she moved through the ballroom. Find out everything about the Okonkwo Bello Foundation, he said quietly. Every board member. Every donor. Every transaction for the past 10 years. Yes, sir. Secretary Yoon hesitated. Sir, that woman. Do you know her? Taehyun's hand moved unconsciously to the inside of his wrist, where the pine tree tattoo marked his skin. A symbol of endurance. Of roots that survive any storm. She's my wife. 2 days later. Kong Corporation headquarters. Gangnam. The file sat on Taehyun's desk like an unexploded bomb. 300 pages. Financial records. Property deeds. Corporate registrations spanning 4 continents. His wife, the woman who drove a 12-year-old Hyundai and wore the same 3 dresses in rotation, controlled assets worth approximately $14 billion. Banks in Lagos. Shipping companies in Singapore. Agricultural conglomerates across Kenya and Tanzania. Real estate in London, Dubai, and now Seoul. All held through a labyrinth of trusts and holding companies. All traced back to a single name, Okonkwo Holdings. Her grandfather's empire. Hidden in plain sight. Taehyun closed the file slowly. His hands were steady. His heart was not. For 5 years, he had believed his marriage failed because Amara couldn't handle his world. The late nights. The corporate demands. The media scrutiny. He had believed she retreated to her small supermarket because she couldn't compete with the women who circled him, heiresses and executives who understood power. He had pitied her. Pitied her. The realization burned like acid in his throat. Meanwhile, Mapo District. The afternoon light filtered through dusty windows as Amara arranged fresh vegetables in the small family supermarket. The bell above the door chimed. Mrs. Park, her elderly neighbor, shuffled inside with her usual shopping basket. Amaria, the old woman said warmly, you work too hard. A young woman like you should be finding a husband, not stacking cabbages. Amara smiled gently. She didn't mention that she already had a husband. She didn't mention that she could buy every building on this street without accessing her primary accounts. Hard work keeps the mind clear, Halmione. Mrs. Park patted her cheek affectionately and moved toward the rice section. The truth about Amara's wealth wasn't spite. It wasn't revenge. It was survival. Her grandfather, Emmanuel Okonkwo, had built his empire from nothing, a market trader in Lagos who became one of Africa's most influential investors. But wealth had attracted vultures. Her parents had been killed in a suspicious accident when she was 17. Lawyers later confirmed it was connected to a hostile takeover attempt. Her grandfather had hidden her, changed her documents, sent her to Seoul to complete her education under a simplified name. Trust no one with the full truth, he had told her before he died. Let them see you as ordinary. Ordinary people survive. She had followed his advice. Even with her husband. That evening. Han River waterfront. The city glittered across the water as Taehyun walked alone. His security team followed at a distance, close enough to intervene, far enough to grant the illusion of solitude. He hadn't slept since the gala. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face. Not the face from 2 nights ago, composed, powerful, untouchable. The face from their wedding day. 6 years ago. She had worn a simple white dress. No designer label. No diamonds. Just fresh flowers in her braided hair and a smile that made him forget every coldness his father had taught him. He had loved her. Truly. Desperately. But he hadn't known how to show it. His phone buzzed. Secretary Yoon. Sir, we've confirmed additional details. Mrs. Kim, Mrs. Kong, appears to be the sole heir to the Okonkwo fortune. But there's a complication. Speak. Someone else is making moves on the inheritance. A man named Daniel Mensah. He claims to be a distant cousin. He's filed legal challenges in 3 jurisdictions. Taehyun stopped walking. The wind off the river cut cold against his face. What kind of challenges? He's claiming Mrs. Kong obtained her inheritance through fraud. That the original will was falsified. If he succeeds, he could seize everything. The pieces clicked together in Taehyun's mind. The gala. The foundation charter. The urgency. Amara wasn't just managing her grandfather's legacy. She was fighting to protect it. 3 days later. Okonkwo Foundation offices. Uedo. The conference room occupied the entire 42nd floor. Amara sat at the head of the table, flanked by her two most trusted advisors, Attorney Kwon Ji-min from Seoul and Barrister Adaora Ease from Lagos. The board members had just finished reviewing the quarterly reports. 14 billion in assets. 700 million in annual charitable distributions. Zero public acknowledgement of the woman who controlled it all. That was how Amara preferred it. The Mensa challenge is escalating, Attorney Kwon said, sliding a document across the table. He's hired representation in Korea now. They're requesting access to your grandfather's original trust documents. Amara studied the filing. He can request whatever he wants. The documents are authentic. We know that, Barrister Ease said carefully. But courts can be influenced. Mensa has connections. Political ones. The implication hung in the air. This wasn't just a legal battle. It was war. The conference room doors opened without warning. Security moved forward, but stopped when they saw who entered. Kang Tae-hyun walked in as if he owned the building. Given his expression, he probably wanted to. Every board member rose instinctively. His reputation preceded him. The Iron Chairman. The man who had crushed 3 competing retail empires in a single fiscal quarter. Only Amara remained seated. Chairman Kang, she said coolly. This is a private meeting. I'm aware. He didn't apologize. He never apologized. I'm here to discuss a business proposal. The board members exchanged uncertain glances. Amara's expression didn't waver. I wasn't aware we had any mutual business interests. Taehyun's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile, but close. We share a marriage license. I'd consider that a mutual interest. The silence that followed was absolute. Attorney Kwon's pen stopped moving. Barrister Ease's eyes widened. The board members suddenly understood why security hadn't stopped him. He wasn't a stranger. He was her husband. Amara rose slowly. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll continue this discussion tomorrow. Attorney Kwon, Barrister Ease, please ensure the Mensa response is filed by Friday. The room emptied with remarkable speed. Nobody wanted to witness what came next. When the doors closed, Amara turned to face her husband fully for the first time in 5 years. You had no right to come here. I have every right. Based on what? A marriage certificate we both stopped honoring. His jaw tightened. The tattoo on his neck, a thin geometric line representing family honor, seemed to darken against his skin. I never stopped honoring it. The confrontation. They stood on opposite sides of the conference table like generals surveying a battlefield. You sent money, Amara said quietly. Every month. For 5 years. You needed it. I never touched it. I know. It's still sitting in the account I opened for you. She shook her head slowly. You never once asked why I left, Taehyun. You just assumed. You walked out. What was I supposed to assume? That maybe I was tired of being invisible. The words landed like physical blows. He said nothing. I sat through 3 years of dinners where your family treated me like hired help, she continued, her voice steady despite the pain beneath it. 3 years of business functions where you introduced me and then forgot I existed. 3 years of sleeping alone because your company always came first. Amara. I didn't leave because I couldn't handle your world. Her eyes finally met his directly. I left because you never made space for me in it. Later. The rooftop garden. Seoul spread beneath them like a circuit board of light. They stood 3 feet apart, close enough to touch, too wounded to try. Why didn't you tell me about the inheritance? Taehyun asked finally. Amara's laugh held no humor. Would it have mattered? Of course it would have mattered. Why? Because you would have treated me differently if you knew I was rich. He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. The truth was too ugly to speak. Yes. He would have treated her differently. His family certainly would have. The realization sickened him. My grandfather warned me about men like you, Amara said softly. Men who measure worth in numbers. He said the only way to know someone's true character is to let them believe you have nothing. She turned to face him. You failed, Tae-hyun. When you thought I was poor, you pitied me. You protected me like a burden. You never once saw me as your equal. That's not true. Isn't it? She reached into her bag and pulled out a thick envelope, the same envelopes he had sent monthly for 5 years. I saved every single one. Unopened. I was going to return them when I finally signed the divorce papers. His blood ran cold. Divorce papers? She nodded slowly. They're being finalized next week. I only delayed because of the Mensa situation. I couldn't afford a public scandal while fighting for my grandfather's legacy. The wind picked up, carrying the distant sounds of the city. Tae-hyun felt something cracking inside his chest. Something he had kept frozen for 5 years. Don't sign them. His voice came out rougher than intended. Amara's expression didn't change. Give me one reason. He stepped closer. Close enough that she could see the vulnerability he had spent a lifetime hiding. Because I made a mistake. And I'm only just beginning to understand how catastrophic it was. For a moment, just a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Then it was gone. Understanding isn't the same as changing. She stepped back. Goodbye, Tae-hyun. She walked toward the elevator. He didn't follow. 1 week later. Luxury hotel. Gangnam. Daniel Mensa was not a subtle man. He had arrived in Seoul with an entourage of lawyers, publicists, and private security. He had booked the presidential suite. He had scheduled interviews with every major business publication in Asia. His message was clear. The unforgettable fortune was stolen, and he intended to reclaim it. The documents prove everything, he told a room full of journalists. My aunt, the real heir, was manipulated by Emmanuel Okonkwo in his final years. The fortune should have passed to our branch of the family. Instead, it went to this woman. A nobody. A shopkeeper. Cameras flashed. Questions overlapped. Daniel smiled with the satisfaction of a man who believed he had already won. Meanwhile, Amara's apartment. Mapo District. The television played Daniel's press conference in the background. Amara watched with calm detachment. She had expected this. Her grandfather had warned her about Daniel, a man who had spent his entire life living off family connections without contributing anything. When the inheritance bypassed him, his entitlement had curdled into obsession. He has no legal standing, Attorney Kwan said through the phone. But he has media access. This is a reputation war as much as a legal one. Then we fight it on both fronts. There's another complication. Amara's hand tightened on her teacup. What? Mensa has approached Kong Corporation for a partnership. He's offering exclusive shipping contracts in exchange for support against your foundation. The words hung in the air. Her husband. Being offered a deal to destroy her. 2 hours later. Kong Corporation headquarters. Daniel Mensa sat across from Tae-hyun with the confidence of a man who believed himself to be holding all the cards. It's simple, Chairman Kong. Your logistics network is the best in Asia. My family's resources, once reclaimed, will open every market in Africa. Together, we could build something unprecedented. Tae-hyun's expression remained unreadable. And my wife. Daniel's smile flickered. Your wife is a fraud, Chairman. Surely you must see that by now. A woman who hid her entire identity from you. Who married you under false pretenses. She's a con artist, nothing more. Silence. The tattoo on Tae-hyun's inner wrist was visible as his hand rested on the desk. The pine tree. Endurance. Roots that survive any storm. Mr. Mensa, Tae-hyun said finally, let me explain something about Korean business culture. He stood slowly. We value loyalty above profit. We honor commitments even when they become inconvenient. And we do not, under any circumstances, betray family. Daniel's confidence wavered. But she's not your family anymore. You've been separated for years. Tae-hyun leaned forward. His voice dropped to a register that had made CEOs twice his age back down. She is still my wife. And you have exactly 30 seconds to leave this building before I have security escort you out. The aftermath. Daniel Mensah left Kong Corporation with his entourage trailing behind him like a deflated parade. But his expression as he entered the elevator was not defeated. It was calculating. He pulled out his phone. "Plan B," he said quietly. "Find another way to reach her." That evening, Amara's supermarket, Mapo District. The store had closed an hour ago, but Amara remained, checking inventory, adjusting displays, keeping her hands busy so her mind wouldn't spiral. The bell above the door chimed. She looked up and froze. Kong Tae-hyun stood in the entrance, still wearing his tailored suit, looking profoundly out of place among the plastic crates and fluorescent lighting. "We're closed," she said flatly. "I know." He walked inside slowly, his eyes moving across the small space. The neat rows of vegetables. The handwritten price signs. The worn wooden counter where she processed transactions. "You built this yourself," he said quietly. "Yes." "While managing a $14 billion empire." "Managing my grandfather's legacy doesn't require luxury. It requires purpose." He turned to face her. "Mensah came to me today. He offered a partnership." Amara's expression didn't change, but her hand stilled on the counter. "And I refused." The words settled between them. "Why?" "Because he's trying to destroy you. And I won't be part of that." She studied him, searching for the lie, the angle, the hidden agenda. She found only exhaustion. And something that looked dangerously like sincerity. "This doesn't change anything," she said finally. "I know. I'm still signing those papers." He nodded slowly. "Then let me help you fight Mensah first. After that, you can do whatever you want." "Why would you help me?" He took a step closer. Close enough that she could see the fine lines around his eyes, lines that hadn't been there 5 years ago. "Because I spent 5 years failing you. Let me spend whatever time we have left trying to make it right." Before she could respond, her phone buzzed. "Attorney Kwon." She answered, and her face went pale. "What is it?" Tae-hyun asked sharply. Amara lowered the phone slowly. "Mensah just filed an emergency injunction. He's freezing all foundation assets pending investigation." Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled. "He's not trying to win in court. He's trying to starve us out." Tae-hyun's expression hardened. The Iron Chairman was back. "Then we give him a war he's not prepared for." The woman who hid billions now faces losing everything, not to the law, but to a man willing to destroy her reputation and legacy. And the husband who failed her has finally chosen a side. But in this war of fortunes and family, will redemption come before it's too late? The following morning, Kong Corporation. Private war room. Tae-hyun had not slept. Neither had his legal team. 12 attorneys occupied the long conference table, surrounded by mountains of documents. The Mensah injunction glowed on the central screen, dissected line by line. "The filing is aggressive but flawed," the lead attorney reported. "He's exploiting a jurisdictional gap between Nigerian and Korean trust law. It won't survive a full hearing, but the freeze could last months." "Months she doesn't have," Tae-hyun said quietly. The foundation's charitable commitments totaled 700 million annually. Hospitals in Lagos. Schools in Nairobi. Agricultural programs feeding hundreds of thousands. If the assets stayed frozen, real people would suffer. That was Mensah's true weapon. Not the law. Cruelty. The war room doors opened. Amara entered, flanked by Attorney Kwon and Barrister Ease. She had accepted his help. Not his affection. Not his apology. Only his resources. It was a beginning. "Before we start," she said, taking her seat across from him, "I want one thing understood. This is a professional arrangement. Nothing more." Tae-hyun inclined his head. Understood. But his eyes lingered on her one moment longer than professionalism required. She noticed. She said nothing. 3 hours later, the strategy took shape. Barrister Ease would challenge the injunction in Lagos, where the original trust was domiciled. Attorney Kwon would attack the Korean filing on procedural grounds. Tae-hyun's team would do something else entirely. "Mensah is spending money he doesn't have," Tae-hyun observed, studying the financial trail his investigators had assembled overnight. Presidential suites. Legal teams in 3 countries. Publicists. Where is the funding coming from? Silence around the table. Then Barrister Ease leaned forward. That's the question no one has asked. Then we ask it. Tae-hyun turned to Secretary Yoon. Follow the money. Every account. Every transfer. I want to know who is really behind Daniel Mensah. Meanwhile, presidential suite. Gangnam. Daniel Mensah poured himself a drink and smiled at the man seated across from him. Chairman Seo Min-jae, CEO of Hanseong Logistics. Kang Tae-hyun's oldest rival. The injunction is filed, Daniel said. Her assets are frozen. Within 6 months, her foundation collapses, her reputation is destroyed, and the courts hand me everything. Seo Min-jae swirled his whiskey slowly. And Kang Corporation's African shipping routes? Yours. Exclusively. The moment I control the Okonkwo-Bello ports. Daniel raised his glass. Kang Tae-hyun loses his wife's fortune and his expansion into Africa in a single stroke. Seo smiled thinly. To the fall of the Iron Chairman. Glasses clinked. Neither man noticed the hotel server who had lingered a moment too long near the door. A server who had been placed there 2 days earlier. By Secretary Yoon. 2 weeks later. African Cultural Center. Itaewon. The legal war raged across 3 continents. But on Sunday afternoons, Amara still came here. She taught a cooking class for Korean African families, jollof rice and kimchi jjigae side by side, 2 heritages sharing 1 kitchen. It was the only place in Seoul where both halves of her heart existed without contradiction. She was ladling stew for a line of laughing children when she saw him. Tae-hyun. Standing awkwardly in the doorway. Holding a grocery bag. Secretary Yoon said you needed palm oil and gochugaru, he said stiffly. The suppliers delivered to the wrong address. I intercepted them. Amara stared at him. The Iron Chairman. Delivering groceries. Personally. You could have sent a driver. I could have. He didn't explain further. He didn't need to. The children swarmed him within minutes. To Amara's astonishment, he didn't retreat. He crouched down, his tailored suit be damned, and let a 6-year-old girl examine the pine tree tattoo on his wrist with solemn fascination. Does it mean something? The girl asked. It means endurance, he said quietly. My grandfather chose it. He said pine trees survive winters that kill everything else. Why? Because their roots go deeper than the frost. Across the kitchen, Amara pretended not to listen. She failed. Later that evening, they walked out together as the center closed. The autumn air carried the smell of roasted chestnuts from a street vendor. You were different today, Amara said. Different how? Human. He almost smiled. I was always human. I just buried it. My father believed emotion was weakness. Every time I showed feeling as a boy, he called it failure. He paused beneath a streetlight. By the time I met you, I had forgotten how to be anything but armor. Amara stopped walking. You never told me that. In 3 years of marriage, you never told me anything about your childhood. I know. Why now? He turned to face her. Because I'm done protecting the wrong things. The silence between them changed texture. No longer hostile. Merely careful. Like ice beginning to thaw, dangerous to walk on, impossible to ignore. This doesn't mean I forgive you, she said softly. I know. It doesn't mean anything. I know that too. But when she drove away in her 12-year-old Hyundai, he stood on the sidewalk watching until her taillights disappeared. And she watched him in her rearview mirror until the road curved. Neither admitted it. 1 month later. Seoul Central District Court. The injunction hearing drew media like blood draws sharks. Daniel Mensah arrived in a convoy of black sedans, waving to cameras. Amara arrived in her old Hyundai. Alone. Deliberately. The photographers didn't even recognize her until she was already inside. That was the point. Inside the courtroom, Mensah's lawyers presented their masterpiece, a document allegedly proving Emmanuel Okonkwo-Bello had been mentally incompetent when he signed his final will. A medical assessment, dated 3 months before his death, signed by a physician in Lagos. This document proves the inheritance was obtained through manipulation of a dying, confused man, the lead attorney declared. The entire trust structure is invalid. Murmurs swept the gallery. Journalists typed frantically. Amara sat perfectly still. Then Barrister Ease rose. "Your Honor, we would like to call a witness." The courtroom doors opened. An elderly Nigerian man entered slowly, leaning on a carved walking stick. Daniel Mensah's face drained of color. "Dr. Chukwuma Obi," Barrister Ease announced. "The physician whose signature appears on that assessment." The old doctor took the stand. His voice was frail but unwavering. "I never wrote that document. I never examined Chief Okonkwo-Bello in his final year. I was recovering from surgery in London, and my hospital records prove it. That signature is forged." He turned his eyes directly toward Daniel Mensah. "And 3 months ago, a man offered me $2 million to stay silent about it." The courtroom erupted. But Barrister Ease wasn't finished. "Your Honor, we also submit financial records tracing Mr. Mensah's legal funding to Hanseong Logistics, a direct corporate competitor of interests connected to Mrs. Kong. This was never an inheritance dispute. It was a coordinated corporate raid using the courts as a weapon." The recordings followed. The hotel suite conversation. Co. Min-jae's voice, crystal clear. "To the fall of the Iron Chairman." Daniel Mensah tried to leave the courtroom. Court officers stopped him at the door. Outside the courthouse, the media swarm was chaos. Cameras, microphones, shouted questions. And then someone finally asked the question that changed everything. "Mrs. Kong, can you confirm you are the sole heir to the $14 billion Okonkwo-Bello fortune?" The crowd fell silent. Amara stood on the courthouse steps in her simple gray coat. 5 years of hiding. 5 years of ordinary. She thought of her grandfather. "Let them see you as ordinary. Ordinary people survive." But she also remembered his final words, the ones she had never told anyone. "And when the vultures are finally beaten, child, stop hiding. Live." She stepped toward the microphones. "Yes," she said clearly. "I can confirm it." The flash of 100 cameras lit the steps like lightning. That night, luxury penthouse overlooking the Han River. The foundation had insisted she stay somewhere secure after the revelation. Reporters had already found her supermarket. Her apartment. Her old life was over. She stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows watching the river carry the city's light, feeling strangely hollow. She had won. Mensah was facing fraud charges. Co. Min-jae's board was already moving to remove him. Her grandfather's legacy was safe. So why did victory feel like standing in an empty room? The intercom chimed. "Mrs. Kong. Chairman Kong is in the lobby." She closed her eyes. "Send him up." He entered quietly. No suit jacket tonight. Just a white shirt, open at the collar, the geometric tattoo along his collarbone visible for the first time in years. She remembered tracing it on their honeymoon. Remembered him telling her it represented sacrifice, the things a man gives up for the people he protects. He had given up nothing for her back then. He had given up everything for her now. Co. Min-jae resigned an hour ago, he said. Hanseong's board is cooperating with prosecutors. Mensah's extradition hearing is next week. "I know." Attorney Kwon called. "Then I suppose there's no business reason for me to be here." "No," she agreed. "There isn't." Neither of them moved. "Why did you really come, Taehyun?" He crossed the room slowly. Stopped an arm's length away. "Because I have spent 5 years rehearsing what I would say if I ever got another chance. And tonight I realized every version was wrong. Every version was about defending myself. Explaining myself." His voice dropped. "So I'm not going to explain. I'm just going to tell you the truth." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "I failed you. Not because you hid your fortune, but because I never gave you a reason to trust me with it. You tested me without meaning to, and I failed every single day for 3 years. I looked at the most extraordinary woman I had ever met, and I treated her like something fragile. Something less. His hand rose, hesitated, then gently, so gently, touched her cheek. You were never less, Amara. You were always more. More than my company. More than my pride. More than every empty thing I chose instead of you. Tears she had refused for 5 years finally broke free. I waited, she whispered. Every night for 3 years, I waited for you to see me. I see you now. It's too late. Then tell me to leave. Silence. The river light moved across the walls. Tell me to leave, he repeated softly, and I will sign whatever papers you put in front of me. I will never contact you again. Your life will be entirely your own. Her hands trembled. And if I don't tell you to leave? He leaned forward and pressed his forehead against hers, the gesture more intimate than any kiss, his breath unsteady for the first time since she had known him. Then I will spend the rest of my life becoming a man worthy of the woman who hid an empire and still chose to stack cabbages with her own hands. She laughed through her tears. And then, slowly, inevitably, the space between them closed. The kiss was soft, aching. 5 years of silence finally speaking. The city lights blurred beyond the window. The night folded gently around them. But at dawn, Taehyun woke to an empty penthouse. On the table sat the divorce papers. Unsigned. And a handwritten note. One kiss doesn't rebuild a marriage. Words don't either. You said you would spend your life becoming worthy. So show me. Not here, in the dark, where it's easy. Out there. Where it costs you something. He read it twice. Then, slowly, the Iron Chairman smiled. She hadn't said no. She had said prove it. Over the following 3 months, Seoul watched the impossible. Kang Tae-hyun restructured his entire corporation, cutting his own compensation to fund a workers' family support program, the first of its kind in Korean retail. He appeared at the African Cultural Center every Sunday. Not for cameras. There were never cameras. He washed dishes. He learned to make jollof rice badly, then adequately, then, according to one brutally honest 8-year-old, almost okay. He flew to Lagos and stood at Emmanuel Okonkwo-Bello's grave in the rain, and bowed the full, formal Korean bow of a son-in-law seeking forgiveness, forehead to the wet earth. Barrister Ease witnessed it. She told Amara. Amara said nothing. But that night, she reread his note from their wedding day, the one she had kept for 6 years in a box she pretended didn't exist. Then came the press conference. Kang Corporation's quarterly earnings announcement. 300 journalists. Live national broadcast. Taehyun stood at the podium, delivered the financial results, record profits, successful African expansion in partnership with the Okonkwo-Bello Foundation, and then set aside his prepared remarks. Before questions, he said, I need to correct a public record. The room stilled. 5 years ago, my wife left me. The media speculated she was a gold digger who failed to secure a settlement. Some of that speculation was encouraged by people inside my own company. I allowed it. That was cowardice. Cameras flashed wildly. The truth is this. My wife left because I was a man who understood acquisition and nothing about love. She possessed a fortune greater than mine and never touched it to impress anyone, while I possessed a fortune smaller than my pride and used it to avoid becoming a real husband. He looked directly into the central camera. Amara, I judged you when I thought you had nothing. I was the one who had nothing. I am sorry. Publicly. Completely. Without condition. He bowed. 90 degrees. The Iron Chairman. On live television. The footage broke every viewership record in Korean broadcast history by nightfall. 6 months later. A hidden countryside villa. 2 hours south of Seoul. There were no 500 guests this time. No chandeliers. No investors. Just 40 people beneath a canopy of pine trees and autumn maples. Barrister Ease. Attorney Kwan. Mrs. Park from the old neighborhood, weeping happily into her handkerchief. The children from the cultural center, scattering flower petals with more enthusiasm than accuracy. Taehyun's elderly mother, who had come to Amara privately weeks earlier and asked forgiveness for years of coldness, and received it, along with an embrace that broke 30 years of frost in that family. Amara wore white and gold, Nigerian Oso-oak fabric tailored with Korean hanbok lines. 2 heritages. 1 woman. No longer hiding either. Taehyun waited beneath the trees, and when she appeared, the Iron Chairman's composure finally, completely, beautifully failed. He wept. He didn't hide it. They renewed their vows in 2 languages. I take you, he said in Korean, not as someone to protect, but as my equal. My superior in courage. My teacher in dignity. I take you, she said in Yoruba, then in Korean, not for who you were, but for who you fought to become. Roots deeper than the frost. She touched the pine tree tattoo on his wrist as she said it. He pressed his lips to her hands. The maple leaves fell like slow red rain. 1 year later. Lagos. Then Seoul. Then everywhere. The Kong, Okonkwo-Bello Foundation opened its first joint headquarters. Twin buildings, one on the Han River, one on Victoria Island, connected by purpose if not geography. Hospitals. Schools. Agricultural programs. Scholarships carrying children between Korea and Africa in both directions. $14 billion and Korea's largest logistics network, no longer competing empires. One legacy. At the Seoul opening ceremony, a young journalist asked Amara the question everyone still wondered. Mrs. Kong, after everything, why did you forgive him? Amara looked across the plaza to where her husband stood surrounded by children from the cultural center, his suit jacket long abandoned, laughing, actually laughing, as a little girl drew a pine tree on his arm with a washable marker, right beside the real one. I didn't forgive the man who hurt me, she said. I fell in love with the man who changed. Those are different men. Only one of them earned this. The final evening. They stood together on the penthouse balcony as the sun set over the Han River, turning the water to hammered gold. Her head rested against his shoulder. His hand covered hers on the railing, her simple gold ring beside his, the tattoos on his wrist catching the last light. No more secrets, he asked quietly. She smiled. One more. He turned, wary. She took his hand and placed it gently against her stomach. For a long moment, the Iron Chairman could not speak at all. Then he laughed, a sound so free, so young, that she barely recognized it, and lifted her off her feet as the golden light wrapped around them both. Below them, the river carried the city's reflections toward the sea. 2 fortunes had become one foundation. 2 wounded hearts had become one home. And the woman who once hid everything now stood in full view of the world. Hiding nothing, fearing nothing, loved not for her fortune, but for her truth. Because in the end, wealth had never been the treasure. Trust was. And they had finally earned it. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more emotional Afro, Korean romance stories. Tell us in the comments, would you have forgiven him? We read every single one. Until next time, may love always find its way home.